In this episode, we react to a discussion about the most common misconceptions about nutrition and health. Hello, welcome to the Go Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man whose strongest takes cannot be contained by your speaker box. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, you ready to put on your bow tie and show them how you do it today?
Yeah, man. You put a lot of pressure on me for people that are listening to us for the first time. So, let's see if I step up to the plate. And
all right. Let's see, man. Yeah, I got to put the pressure on you, man. You thrive under pressure.
Yeah,
so that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, man. And I'll say this for the audience that can see us on YouTube. I'm wearing a hat because I'm having a bad hair day. So I apologize as a middle-aged man for wearing a baseball cap on a show.
You don't feel professional enough to be a podcaster?
Yeah, I do have a two-tone collared shirt on to make up for that shortfall. So,
All right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. Now, we're recording on January 6, 2026. And Tunde, we saw a recent piece in CNBC, which attempted to knock down what the author, Harvard-trained oncologist Ezekiel Emanuel, believed to be the 6 biggest myths in nutrition that many people still believe. Briefly, the myths he's knocking down were that all snacking is bad, people need to eat more protein, fiber supplements work as well as whole foods, low-fat dairy is always better, all fats are bad, and a person can exercise off calories. So those are the 6. So of those 6, which of the 6 biggest nutrition lies, as they put it in the article, stands out to you the most?
I would say snacking, that all snacking is bad. Because
so he's saying that that's a lie, that all snacking is not bad. And so why does that one stand out to you?
Just because of the different things that we've been taught, I'd say, through our culture and from the media and all that stuff over recent decades. I mean, of intermittent fasting and certain things like that led me to believe that snacking and things like that in between meals may not be that productive. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I think is he does a good job with that section of the article, and that's why it stuck out to me, differentiating the idea of snacking on ultra processed stuff like potato chips and things like that versus whole foods. And in this case, I don't mean whole foods like giving a promotion to the grocery store. I mean foods that have not been processed. So things like nuts, berries, fruit, bananas, stuff like that. So the point I'm making is that once I read it and looked at snacking in that way, because it's funny, when I was reading this article in preparation, I was actually eating pistachios. So it was one of those where I was like, the thing, he says that nuts have certain natural fats in them that are healthy. So it was just a reminder that, I'm better off snacking on these pistachios than I would be on the Lay's potato chips that are in my cupboard as well. So it's the idea of snacking not being bad, but again, what are we actually putting in our bodies? So that's why that one stuck out to me.
Well, yeah, because it basically is saying that because because the snacking has been oftentimes associated with ultra processed, quote unquote, snack foods, that if snacking was centered around nuts and fruits and not sweetened nuts and sweetened dried fruit, but like in their more natural state, minus any roasting or something like that, then the taboo of snacking would not even exist in the first place. I found the one that was the most interesting to me, though, to be the one about all fats are bad. Because that's been kind of like in our life, we're both in our 40s. We've seen this arc, to the extent of, I remember when I'm in my 20s and they're coming up with substitute fats, Olestra and, all this other stuff where it's like, hey, this is a fat you can eat and your body won't digest it and it'll just run through your body. And it's giving people diarrhea, but they're feeling good. They're like, hey, man, I'm not getting any of this fat. And it always struck me as a little bit extreme, because it's like, well, that seems that all fats are bad would seem to be, it is the kind of thing that's an oversimplification that it's like, hey, we might be missing something there. But this battle still persists, in terms of we look at being overweight as a bad thing. And what's overweight is, okay, well, you have too much fat. So it's like, oh, well, if I'm eating fat, then I'll put on fat. It makes kind of surface level sense. But when you go back further, when you look at, kind of these macronutrients and so forth and how each one has a role and a purpose, then it makes more sense. And so in the same way, what you're saying with the snack foods, as far as, okay, well, the idea that maybe all snacks are bad is an oversimplification. It's like, okay, well, it depends on what you're snacking on. Well, the fat thing is kind of the same thing that's being attacked there, is saying, okay, well, not all fats are bad, but certain types of fats are really bad for you and will be producing weight gain, and other types are health promoting. And then, but kind of in that same mode, it's like, well, maybe our issue isn't just the fats, but it's also the ultra processing, the trans fats, or what he's saying is like the ultra processing and the sugars and stuff, which will actually your body will use to make fat inside of you, versus whether you ate the fat or not. So a lot of these seem to come from kind of an oversimplification that existed, kind of a rule of thumb that then it's more context, more information. It's like, well, actually, that's not 100% true. But those rule of thumbs tend to be maybe easy to follow, or not easy to follow in practice, but easy to conceive, easy to understand. And so they persist. And so that's it's along the same kind of lines.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said, what stands out to me is the word artificial. And obviously, I can't help but make a connection in my brain to the modern, what we think of as artificial intelligence.
Oh, my God.
And the idea that our culture, but that's where I'm going somewhere with this, which is our culture. I don't know when this happened in the American story, probably post-World War II, with some of the industrialization and the ability to do things quicker. So I would say like the idea of a microwave, that instead of making a meal at home that might take someone 2 to 3 hours to cook and prepare and all that, now you can give people by the 1960s and 70s either a quote unquote TV dinner, which is already made and just stick it in the oven, or a microwave. And you could have your meal ready in 15 to 30 minutes or less. That allowed us to become more productive and spend more time at work and do certain things like that. But what the trade-off was,
American way, man. It always,
that's what I'm saying, right? It's about productivity. So it made us more productive in certain ways, but it's totally anti-productive from our health experience, the idea of the type of food that we're eating. And I guess that's what I'm getting at with the idea of snacking and highly processed foods, things like that, versus whole foods. And one of the things I found interesting in the article was they had a study they cited that I think they said they fed the test group of people. One had whole foods only for 2 weeks snacking on, and one had ultra processed foods only, but they took in this exact same amount of calories. So hypothetically, if they took in 10,000 calories over that 2 weeks from both sides, they said in 2 weeks,
from those sources.
Yeah. And in 2 weeks, the ones that did the ultra process gained 2 extra pounds of weight than the ones who were eating the whole foods. And I found that fascinating, thinking in only a 2 week period, there's that level of change in the human body. And so,
and remember, we did the show on how ultra processed foods change how your brain works. Because that's what we're talking about, is like those people wanted more food when they consumed the same amount of calories from snack foods of ultra processed versus the same amount of calories from whole foods. The people who ate the snack food ultra processed stuff, they were hungrier, when it came to eating other stuff. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's just to finish off. That's why it got me thinking about artificial, and not to go on a totally different discussion here, but that's why I started thinking about artificial intelligence. Like, what are we not thinking about as a society? Thinking
as
that
we run to embrace artificial intelligence?
Yeah, like delegating intelligence to some other entity because it's better for me. I'm more productive because ChatGPT helps me answer a complicated question faster. It's kind of like the microwave versus cooking a full meal.
And I'll go beyond just productivity. A lot of it is also convenience. A lot of it is also just being able to distribute food. You go before the microwave, and you have like the introduction of canned foods, and how that allowed, whether it be World War II or whether it be just distributing a large amount of food and calories that's not spoiling, that's not going bad over a large space. So you can end up with, you go from 1 billion to 8 billion over 100 years or whatever it'll be, or 120 years. It allows you to feed a lot more people. But what we gave up, so to speak, was health. And that reminded me of when we did the book Sapiens, and it talked about how the agricultural revolution basically traded the ability to have many more people with for having healthier people, because agricultural societies because they were eating these grains, they were eating them all the time. They were just less healthy and less physically capable than, and they had other problems, back problems and stuff like that first came up after the agricultural revolution, after the introduction of that, versus the hunters and gatherers, which had better longevity, not just lived longer, lived healthier when they were living longer. So it's like these trades of these trades that we make as humans, as far as whether you, like you said, to be able to work more or just to be more convenient, and then your point now with artificial intelligence, just to think less. These trades that we make, a lot of times, it goes back to, I mean, you appreciate this as a financial services guy, it goes back to the idea there's no free lunch. Everything that you do has costs and or trade-offs. The other one I wanted to touch on with you real quick, though, was you can't you can't exercise off excess calories. Because I know that you and I, I know you're very diligent with your workout, and we're going to talk about that, in our second part of today's show. But and then myself also, just something that we both, are interested in the continuing the workout piece. But that's kind of one of those things I know from earlier, where it's like, okay, well, I'll get a good workout in, and then I'll go to the all-you-can-eat buffet, and then it's all good because I ate a bunch first. But your reaction to that one in particular, I guess, were you surprised that that's still a myth? Because even, you understand when you work out, you burn 300, maybe 400 calories or, 200 calories or whatever. But when you eat, like a hamburger is way more than just one. Is way more than that. So I wanted to get your specific thoughts on that. And because, that's not necessarily the purpose of the exercise. While exercise has a lot of benefits, burning off extra calories is not necessarily how it's going to work for you.
Yeah, no, it's, I think that's true. And I think that's why this stuff is complex. And I can appreciate that most of us in our society, it's almost impossible to understand all of this, because unless you really get into nutrition and how the body works and how it burns calories and what different types of inputs help it burn, or what type of there's different types of calories, right? There's the empty calories versus this and that. So, then it's that's what I'm saying. Then it's a lot harder to grapple with these concepts, because it and this is not to say people are dumb or anything. It's just like we naturally as humans like to flatten kind of nuanced things because it makes it a lot easier just to comprehend it. So the simple math equation in our mind sometimes is, well, if I go jog, for 10 miles, or I go lift weights, or I do something, if I burn 500 or 800 calories in that workout, then I can afford to eat 500 calories. And, without all the nuances, you could be looking at going to the snack machine and getting, a Cinnabon or something like that. And if it says it has 300 calories, in your mind, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm still net positive on my calorie burn. But that type of calories is probably going to do way more damage to you long term, not just from a weight or thing, but also things like cancer, all that kind of stuff, versus if you had 300 calories of leafy green vegetables, or the grass-fed, non-hormone injected, piece of steak or something like that. So that's why I think a lot of this is complex. Is because it just requires a certain level of education and subject knowledge as you enter the door about this topic.
I'd say I'd say you're correct, but I would go a little further. And I think that what the issue is that there is a lack of translation. The body speaks a different language than what we think in. We think in, our human languages, and we think in our organizations as far as food groups and all this other stuff. The body speaks in the language of hormones. And so, yes, like you eating this Cinnabon, you have the calorie load to deal with, but you also have what that's going to do. What kind of signaling is that going to do for as far as your body's hormones? When you work out, when you exercise, there's different types of exercise and there's different types of hormone responses that you get from that. And this is, getting into also as far as what you eat, as far as all fat, why all fats aren't bad, or why different types of fats or different types of calories, sugars and stuff like that affects you a different way. And it's because when there was this whole calorie in, calorie out paradigm that was what people said was all that there was. It failed to understand, okay, well, this will do this to your insulin hormone, or this will do this to your cortisol, or this will do this, all these different hormones. If we had the ability to understand that a little bit more, and we do to some degree, you can understand. When I work out, for example, when I lift weights and stuff like that, and I talk to my family about this and everything, like there's one thing about the resistance as far as, oh, okay, yeah, I want to get stronger, stuff like that. But actually, what I'm trying to do actually is make sure that I trigger the right hormone signaling. Like I want my body to respond in this certain way. So how do I get my body to respond in a certain way? Was like, I got to get my hormones to my body's how my hormones to how I communicate with my body. So if I want, and so working out is one there, but then also what you eat, when you eat it, you eat something super sugary or something like that late at night, shoot your insulin up at night. That's like the worst thing possible as far as, your body managing itself, because that's telling your body one signal, hey, we need to load up on energy because something's about to happen. And then you go to sleep. Your body's like, what am I going to do with all this energy? I got to put all this energy away, store it. How's it stored? In fat. And so the body language, is oftentimes something that, because we don't think of that stuff kind of intuitively, you can learn about it, but that's where that disconnect is that you're talking about, is like we're not thinking in terms of how what I'm doing is signaling to my body. We're thinking of it in terms of, okay, well, I'll do this, and then I've already done one thing, so I'm all good. So any last thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're talking, the idea of holistic comes to mind. And the idea, I think we've seen this in medicine, the holistic doctor is someone who is trying to take account for all the things, let's say you're talking about and versus, and I'm not criticizing, our medical thing. I understand that the necessity for specialists, cardiologists and neurologists and all that. But I think that the way that our system has dealt with people in the healthcare has been too much of this thing over here is just on its own, and not recognizing
not
the
looking at
holistic
things
nature.
And how they
all touch each other in a sense. And so, like with me, with my heart issues in recent years, learning that my liver producing cholesterol is really what's causing the plaques in my arteries, which makes it harder for my heart to pump blood and oxygen around my body. So what I think is really a cardiovascular issue is actually an issue with my liver.
But you can go a step further. But you can go a step further and say, well, why is my liver doing that?
Oh. Yeah, well, part of my reason was drinking brown liquor. So so that's what I mean. It's a holistic look. So me drinking alcohol at a certain pace created all these other issues that led to me having a heart attack when I was 46. So that's an interesting example of how all of this stuff affects other stuff. And I think that because I think it's kind of like we look at the world because everything is about culture. So we are come from the culture of the industrial age, right? The last 150 years. So we look at everything still kind of like mechanical.
Well, and also drilling down for expertise as opposed to getting a big picture, which is a cultural kind of a view, which you can make a lot of progress and stuff by drilling down more and more expertise, more and more expertise, more and more in a specific area. You can build a nuclear bomb, but you lose something with that type of focus.
You forget that thing you're drilling down on still affects something way over here. So,
and I know physiologically, there's been a lot with this. Just I'll add this before we leave, where you see this like with sports and athletes and so forth, and like the thought of the isolation, like, oh well, this muscle is messed up, so we got to just treat this muscle. And there was oftentimes a neglect of, okay, well, hey man, if something's wrong on your left foot, then you might end up causing a problem somewhere else because you're going to compensate for that, and then you're going to end up with something wrong on your right foot, or you're going to end up with something else going on. And so I think with sports, the idea that these things are related, and one thing going wrong or you doing one thing wrong here could cause something else to cascade is there. Also, is how we're starting to have more of an awakening, we in our society, as far as how these things interrelate. And so, I commend this oncologist as far as trying to get this stuff out there, because it is attacking kind of these flatter paradigms that have existed, and just saying, hey, like this stuff is, it doesn't have to be overly complex, but maybe the way that we're looking at it, the kind of approach that we're taking on this stuff has led us into some corners, into some narrow areas that aren't serving our health outcomes overall. And that's part of the continual discovery process, because maybe you do got to get more specialized knowledge for you then to be able to step back and say, actually, we need to take a more holistic look with our specialized knowledge. So, but I think we can wrap this up from there.
So after all that, I'm going to go to ChatGPT and ask it what it thinks about our conversation. So
I'm sure it'll encourage
the artificial
tell you how amazing it was. But we're going to wrap this part up. We'll have a second part of our discussion today, and we look forward to talking with you then.